While entrepreneurs are often lauded with creating new businesses and ideas, it is more often the case that change agents working within organizations or intrapreneurs are responsible for innovation and seeing those new ideas through to completion. Welcome to the Innovation Economy Intrapreneurs Series. I am your co-host, Adam Chen, an independent change management consultant and current president of AmenityLink, a property technology company. In this series, you will hear stories and insights from leaders within organizations that have had the courage to create new ways to move business forward. To listen to the latest episodes or sign up for the Innovation Economy newsletter, go to innovationeconomy.show or click on your favorite podcast app to make sure you hear the latest episodes. And now, on to the show. Well, welcome back to the show. I'm very excited to have our guest on today, and hopefully our listeners will gain some insights just as I have of speaking with her. But today we have Rachel Druckenmiller on the show. I met Rachel years ago at a previous speaking engagement, and her message has really stayed with me through the years, and I'm very pleased to introduce you here today. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. Yeah, it's wild how you never know how one connection at some point in your life is going to somehow end up showing up in another area, right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, no, I'm super excited to be here today.
Yeah, it's wonderful that you could carve out some time in your busy schedule. So I want to start. You have a very fascinating journey. And before we dig in kind of the topic at hand today, I'd love for you just to briefly tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so I think something that's worth mentioning up front is that I had this very unusual place that I came from and that both my parents are entrepreneurs. So my dad refers to himself as terminally unemployable, and he's still working at 73 and, worked out of the converted fourth bedroom in the house I grew up in. And I never saw my dad have a boss. I always saw my dad just, carve his own path and decide what his life was going to look like, what his work was going to look like. And that was my model. And then when I was a teenager, my mom left her corporate job and went out on her own. And now she's been at that for 25 years. So I had a very unusual starting point. And I was always interested in people, always interested in human behavior, watched a lot of Oprah growing up. And when I got into my career, I didn't really know what I was going to do, but I was interested in things like psychology and health and nutrition. And so I started interning at a benefits consulting firm and eventually sort of carved my own way and my own path there and became a wellness coordinator. I took my interest in health and psychology and combined them. And there was never a position like that there before. I just decided that's what I was going to be and then tried to figure out enough stuff to fill my time to be it. And then I, evolved. There were a lot of challenges in that role. Sometimes I almost lost my job at one point because there wasn't enough for me to do. And I had to find a way to show my value in other ways. And then I stayed at that job for 13 years. And then I took the part of my work that I had started doing in probably the early 2010s, which was to speak at events. So management trainings, company events, lunch and learns, sometimes there'd be 3 people in the room. But and then I got my first keynote in 2016 and I was like, there is something here that I really, really like. And so in 2019, I said, you know what? Without a business plan, on a hope and a prayer, I'm going to leave my corporate job and I'm just going to be a full-time speaker. And I've been at that ever since.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, the way you described your wellness coordinator position for 13 years, that is how I define entrepreneurship. You really took ownership of a role of something the company never had before. And now you've started your own thing. So tell me a little bit about your business, Unmuted. It's really fascinating. I've taken a look at the website. There's a lot of great content on there. Maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about your mission.
So I think all of us, I know that all of us in some areas of our lives, we silence ourselves, we mute ourselves, we hold ourselves back either creatively, emotionally, psychologically, mentally, relationally, professionally. We let things like a fear of doubt and rejection and conflict and other people's opinions of us cause us to not show up authentically. And all of us have different reasons why that is true of us. And so when I was starting my business, I thought about like, what do I really want to say? What do I want to stand for? What do I want to be known for? What do I want to be about? And I look back at journals. I'm a big journaler, and I had a journal. This is back in 2015, so 4 years before I launched my company. I started writing about getting unmuted. And at the time, I wasn't myself. You know what I mean? I I was still dealing with a lot of my own internal challenges. I was not out there being bold and brave and courageous the way that I wanted to be. But I knew that that's what I wanted to stand for. And so, you know, when I launched my business, that was the thing I hung my hat on. And even still, I sort of held back from really claiming that as what I wanted to talk about because it didn't feel corporate enough.
Hmm.
So I come from corporate. I'm like, well, I need to talk about workplace culture. I need to talk about employee engagement. But what I really want to talk about is helping people to unmute themselves, to show up in the world with greater courage and confidence and clarity so that they're more fulfilled and have greater impact and have less regret and resentment. Because I see so many people dealing with all of those things. And I had been there myself. And so when I launched this thing, I said, this is what I stand for. This is what I want to be about. And this is what I want to help people do.
Yeah, that's great. So you weren't necessarily unmuted when you yourself were an entrepreneur doing this wellness work at this company. Do you think you need to be unmuted to be an entrepreneur and innovate from within and take ownership within, or how do you look at that?
You got to be what my dad always says. He's like, you just got to be kind of nervy, because I did not have any. I mean, I was a psychology major in undergrad, and I had done some research in the area of nutrition, had some papers published when I was an undergrad. But other than that, I had no credentials to be doing what I was doing. I happened to meet someone who was in Maryland. She had gotten her master's degree in public health, and her focus was in workplace wellness. Her name's Jessica Sheffield. And I met her in 2007 through my job. And I didn't even know what she was doing was a thing. And if you think about it, corporate wellness in 2007, very progressive. Now people are like, corporate wellness. I'm like, it's 2023. Hello. This has been around for a minute, longer than 3 years. And so I just really got connected to that. And I put myself in situations where, like, I don't know who I thought I was. I was 23, and I'm like, well, this is what I want to do. Which most 23-year-olds are thinking, I need to slog it out. I need to just put in the time. And then in 7, 8, 10 years, maybe I can do a little bit of what I want. But to me, from where I came from and what I saw work could be, that was not acceptable to me. The idea of having to just go through the motions and do something that I did not care about, like truly in the core of my being, was unfathomable. Like I couldn't imagine doing that. I'm very intentional. I'm very purposeful just in how I approach things in general. And to me, work felt so purposeful and I just felt so drawn to this thing. And so I think, unmuting is a process. I don't think it's people like, when did you get unmuted? Like there's a moment you were and then you weren't. No. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. Like there's a part of you that maybe becomes a little braver and bolder, and then another part, and then another part, and then it's an unfolding over the course of your lifetime. And it happens, it doesn't ever stop. And so I think in order to be an entrepreneur, you have to have a little bit of nerve. And you have to be willing to, one thing, I was a strategic thinker. And so I was able to take the things that I wanted to do and connect them to the things that I knew were important to the business. And I learned, this was probably in 2012, maybe 2011, something like 4 or 5 years into this. And I was frustrated initially. I felt no one took me seriously. I felt like I was referred to as like, oh, you're so passionate, which felt like a bit of a dig. Like just like a young, passionate young woman, and I wanted to be taken seriously and I didn't feel like I was. And so at one point I remember asking our CEO, I'd gone to a conference and I came back and I said to him, what do you want to hear people saying about our program, like our wellness program? What do you want to overhear people saying? What kind of impact do you want this to be having? And he said, oh, I want people to say like, oh, this changed my behavior. This changed my life. It was fun. And I realized I'd been taking this really academic, technical approach to what I was doing. And my boss was like the life of the party. That's just like what his personality was. And I was like, oh, Rachel, you're missing it. If you can find a way to make this fun and you can find a way to help him be seen as a thought leader among other executives, that will help you win. That's what's going to get you support for this thing. And so I started to do little things, started applying for awards. In 2012, we won a Healthiest Employer Award in Baltimore. And then I think they started to make the connection between, like this is a thing that we're doing that can actually have an impact on the business and on our brand. and help us stand out as thought leaders. And it was when I made that connection 5, 6 years in that I started to get more traction. So you have to be willing to think strategically, to take initiative, and to make the connections between what you want to do and how it's going to benefit the business.
Absolutely. Yeah, and, in previous conversations I've had on the show, we've certainly talked about some of that risk taking. You got to have the gumption to kind of put yourself out there a little bit. And I've talked also a lot about some of the external factors, right? The company culture you kind of mentioned a little bit. With your background in psychology, I'd love to dig in a little bit more about maybe some of the internal barriers that might be holding people back. And obviously that dovetails very nicely with unmuted and kind of
Yeah.
how you've described some of that. In one of the other conversations I've had, we've talked about this concept of success mindsets, right? From this gentleman, Ryan Godfredson. And it's kind of a extrapolation on some of Carol Dweck's mindset work and that. But I think the core thesis of what he's trying to say is that you have to approach every situation, especially obviously in business, assuming that people are doing the best that they can. And I believe that. I think that people do inherently want to do good work, and they want to do the best job that they can. I think there's a lot of social pressures in society right now, obviously, that of what success looks like. And we need some external gratification, maybe, whether that's healthy or not, we can debate, right? But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it's the best they possibly could do, though. So I'm really curious from your perspective, do you believe that people inherently want to do good and do a good job? And maybe what are some of those things that you've experienced, in your own life, but also in your consulting engagements? What are some of those internal barriers that hold people back from realizing their full potential?
So I do think everyone wants to do their best. I inherently believe in the inherent goodness of people and that people want to do well. There's so many factors that contribute to why someone feels confident to show up and be authentic at work and to share their thoughts and to share their ideas. Some of it, I mean, we could go 50,000 layers deep with this, and I'm not the most qualified person to talk about it at that level, but there's trauma. People go through traumas. They have things that happen that send the message to them that you need to just fly under the radar. You need to not be disruptive. You need to not cause a fuss. I mean, what are we taught when we're kids? Sit in your seat quietly and fold your hands and shut your mouth. Like, that's what we're told as kids. And you get to the workplace and there's like, tell us all your ideas. That's a totally conflicting message. I mean, you sort of train people to just go along and follow the rules and do what they're supposed to do and not, kind of step outside the box but then when you get into the workplace, you're telling people, we want to innovate and we want all your ideas and we want to do things differently. Tell us what you think. And it's a really difficult transition, I think, for a lot of people to make because they don't come from places where that type of genuine curiosity and innovation are encouraged or modeled. So for me, I had this modeled, right? I mean, my model of what work was like my dad had clients come to the door and my brother and I knew we better be quiet when dad had a client upstairs. But we got to see our dad during the day. We got to meet interesting people. We had this different experience of what work could be. And so, I think some of the things, I've asked people actually in my keynotes that I do, I've asked at this point, probably at least 1,500 people to tell me what is a way that you're silencing yourself or doubting yourself or holding yourself back at work. And the most common theme that I see through their responses is fear. So I alluded to this a little bit before, but it's fear of rejection, failure, retaliation, conflict, being wrong, looking stupid. It's a fear of, I don't have enough experience. It's a fear of, I don't want to be out of line. It's a fear of other people's judgment. And so all of those fears put people in a place to say, like, that is not worth the risk. I'm just going to put my head down and I'm just going to do what I'm told. And I think that is true for a lot of people. Now, some people are more inclined to be wired that way. There was an assessment we took at work a decade ago called the Predictive Index. And this tool was fascinating because it looked at behavioral drives and motivations. And, there's a variable there of dominance, what they call dominance. And you can either fall on the dominance scale toward let me lead or let me collaborate. And a lot of people in organizations, they're just like, let me collaborate. I just want to work with other people and get through this and figure it out. When I took my assessment, you answer the questions through two lenses. One is how you see yourself, and the other question is how you think you're expected to show up in the job that you're in. And my maps showed up as two different people. Like the way I thought I needed to be is I thought people just Rachel, can you just do what we ask you to do? And my very entrepreneurial independent spirit was like, no, I want to lead. I want to take charge. I have a vision for things. I'm willing to put myself in that spot. And I feel like a lot of times in corporate, people like that are squashed. It's like, well, that's not your role. You're not in that position. You don't have that title. You don't have the experience yet. And we limit people, corporations, shut people down instead of seeing, oh, this is somebody who has potential. This is somebody who's taking initiative. This person might be 23 years old, but they've got some great ideas. Maybe we should listen to them. So I think it's a combination of things that have happened in people's past that have wired them to either feel safe or not safe to open up, to share, to express themselves, to express their ideas. I think that's part of it. I think it's even their history at work. If they've worked at a job before that was really toxic, that shut them down and made them suppress themselves, then they've learned in order to play safe, in order to not get in trouble, I got to do that. So I'm going to zip it. And then I think it's also corporate behavior in terms of like leadership, not pouring into and seeing and nurturing these people that are taking initiative for any number of reasons why we decided it's not okay for them to do that yet.
Yeah. So certainly it's obviously a mix of both kind of the internal factors, right, to kind of put yourself out there, but also, the external factors that will allow that to grow. And it's got to be demoralizing if you've kind of overcome some internal obstacles only to get smacked in the face by this culture that kind of puts you back in your place, right? Or so to speak. So if that's a situation, I mean, how would somebody deal with that? What's your advice? Do they just go and look for another job? Like, what do they look for?
I mean, I think if you feel like you got nothing to lose, right? And you're in a position where you feel like you're underutilized, you're undervalued, because it's so demoralizing to feel like you have more to give and someone doesn't want to take it.
Yeah.
That's really demoralizing. In an age of quiet quitting where people are doing the bare minimum, if you are somebody who has a lot of initiative and a lot of drive and a lot of energy and people are basically ignoring you or telling you you're too much, that is so incredibly demoralizing. Like, why would that person keep trying? So I think part of it is, and there were times where candidly, I felt that way in my job where I felt like, does anyone care about what I think about this? And sometimes the answer internally was like, no, they didn't. They were going to do what they were going to do. And your opinion was like noted, but not necessary. And on those days, I would grow resentful. And it would make me not want to share things. It would make me not want to, express ideas, which was really, really difficult. So I think if someone's in that position, I think one of the things they could do if they're feeling brave, or even if they're not feeling brave, if they're feeling scared, they can make the choice to be brave and to say, hey, I really appreciate, and express something you genuinely appreciate about your work, your job, this person that you're talking to. I really appreciate this. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to do X. And I feel like there's more that I can give. And here's something that I think I could contribute to in a meaningful way. Could we talk about, could we explore, could we kind of come up with a plan for how I might do that? Because I know I could contribute in that way. And it really lights me up when I get to do that. And I would love to support the organization in that way. Could we explore how I might do that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's about as non-threatening as you could get. And if you have the courage to do something like that, to have that conversation, and the other person, now this is assuming you have some skill in that area, or at least a willingness to learn, right? If you're delusional, it's like American Idol where people are up there and it's like, you can't sing. Like, because sometimes people are in denial. Not everyone is totally self-aware, but let's assume you're a reasonable person who has some degree of self-awareness of your own abilities. And you have that conversation and you get shot down, then you have a decision to make. I'm at a place where I don't feel valued. It is, how long do I want to stay here and tolerate that feeling? Because that will affect other areas of your life. It'll likely affect your health and well-being. It'll likely affect your relationships at home because you'll take that resentment that you have at work and you'll take it to the people that you love and care about most. So it's like the question I asked this question in my TED Talk is, what is the cost of you silencing yourself? What is it costing you? And a lot of people don't think about that. And so I think that's a really important question for people to sit with and be honest with themselves about.
I want to make sure you know about the other podcast from the Agile brand, the award-winning show about marketing strategy, technology, and the customer experience, and building the brand of the future. It's called The Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, and in it we talk with leaders at some of the world's top brands, the MarTech platforms that are leading the way, and other thought leaders in marketing, CX, and digital transformation. Now in its 5th year with over 400 episodes and 1 million downloads, make sure you check it out with new episodes Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. To listen to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, you can find it wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can go to theagilebrand.show. That's theagilebrand.show. Now let's get back to the show.
You know, a lot of what you're describing too, I might also define as you're an integrator. You've kind of blended together your personal, you know, your work life, and there's certainly folks out there that are maybe separators and try to keep those things in silos too.
Sure.
You know, can you still be an innovator? Can you still be brave? Can you still become unmuted as an integrator? Can you also do that as a separator? Like, how do you reconcile those two worlds?
So when you say a separator, you mean somebody who basically has their passion projects and then they have their job and the two don't talk to each other. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. They just keep their work life and their personal life kind of in silos, right? And they don't, it doesn't impact, or I would say maybe they're blind to how it's impacting each other.
Okay, right? I was like, it impacts each other whether they know it or not. Yeah. Like, newsflash, everybody. I mean, I think the nature of an entrepreneur is such that you have some type of passion or penchant for something that you're infusing into your job. I think that's a lot of times how entrepreneurship shows up, is there's somebody that has this inherent passion or interest in something and they try to integrate it into their job intentionally. But I don't think in order to be innovative that you have to do that. I think somebody can be in a job, not necessarily have, it may not be their greatest personal passion, but if there's somebody who's curious, I think the link here is curiosity. If somebody has the capacity to be curious, I think that is really the differentiator. Just that desire to want to know, to want to dig deeper, to want to explore, to want to understand. And that for me is one of the things I think that's really helped and guided me for so much of my journey, is I'm an inherently very curious person. And so I think anyone has the capacity to develop curiosity by asking, better questions. My dad, one of my favorite questions from my dad, like curiosity question that I use in a lot of the leadership keynotes I give, is if it were just right, what would it look like? So if it would fill in the blank on whatever it is, if this process were just right, what would it look like? If the way that I communicated at work were just right, what would it look like? If I were showing up authentically at work, what would that look like? If I were more confident, what would that look like? So inviting people into asking questions like that of themselves, and then also within an organization, leaders can model this, I think, by asking people, hey, we have this process here, and if you were to change something about it or about our organization or the way we do things, if you could like wave your magic wand, what's one thing you would suggest that we do differently? And if they're not used to having their opinion asked, they might think there's some type of a ninja move you're trying to pull over on them. So that may take time to get people to open up about that. But then once they share something, say like, oh, what's another thing? It's like a second. If you come up with like a second thing we could do differently, what would that be? Oh, okay. And like really be with them in it and really listen to them and really try to model something, Google active listening, right? But really try to model what it looks like to validate and to empathize and to even mirror somebody. So what I heard you say was, you think that if we did this, it would have a really significant impact. And just somebody hearing their own words repeated back to them helps to make them feel validated, because most people don't listen to really hear somebody. They listen to like get to their point. So, I think that is a really, powerful practice that leaders can model too, about how to get more of this out of people. But I think curiosity is the core of it all.
Curiosity, yeah. Curiosity of yourself, curiosity to ask those questions. So in your corporate engagements, and you're dealing with leaders on a daily basis, I guess step one is awareness. They need to know that they need to do something differently. Otherwise they wouldn't have hired you. But how do you how's that engagement go? How do you get them started to thinking outside the box and starting thinking about asking those types of questions you just mentioned?
So, I mean, all the work I do keynotes and leadership trainings and retreats and, team building experiences. So I'm strictly focused on speaking and facilitation. That's really when I put my facilitator hat on.
Yeah.
And so I invite people, like I'll give you an example. So tomorrow I'm keynoting an event in the Property Management Association space. And one of the things that we're going to do, we're talking about leveling up your leadership. Their theme is game on. It's like a video game theme. And so one of the things I'm going to invite them into to start is to think about a leader who has had a positive impact on you, somebody that you respect or admire. Like, what are some words you would use to describe that person? And I get them like thinking about the topic, but making it relevant to them. And then we'll do a fun exercise where, we have a sort of like creative way of sharing those ideas with each other. And then we'll go into, one of the questions I'll ask them, the flow of the talk is reflect, reframe, recalibrate. And so the reflection part, I'll invite them to think about when you show up as your best at work, as a team member, as a leader, whoever the group is, what are some of the qualities or characteristics that you show up with when you're at your most effective, when you're least effective? They have a conversation with each other. They talk about it. Just, again, making it real, making it personal. And then we do like a word cloud and get everyone's words up there about how they're most effective. And then we start to paint this picture and say, okay, it's sort of like, Dorothy, you can click your heels together and go home at any time. People know what they're supposed to do. You know what I mean? Like people know what they're supposed to do to be effective at work. Like they'll say to listen, to empathize, to be present with people, to be kind, to be compassionate, to be caring. They know. And so part of it is reminding them that they know. And so through the process of facilitation, like in all of the sessions that I deliver, it's never just me in the front of the stage talking at people. It's always involving people, because when people are involved in a process, they're more likely to be engaged. And so every 15 minutes or so, they're doing something to either reflect or to connect with another person, to make something relevant and real and personal to themselves, and to start to capture the collective wisdom and insight around that particular topic. And so that is how I find is a really effective way to do it, is to not just say, hey, be curious, but to invite people into moments of curiosity in real time with each other. That's the thing that makes the difference, because then they get to experience it.
That's key. It's the giving of permission for people to become unmuted, because we've all inherently put up these barriers to prevent ourselves from really, truly putting ourselves out there, being vulnerable, right? Out of fear, right? Is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And also the one thing I'll say too is storytelling, right? Because everyone connects to storytelling. Like I talked to a group yesterday that potentially is going to bring me into something in January. And they said, she hasn't heard me speak, but she said, yeah, my colleague said she can make grown men cry. So I was like, oh yeah, well, I mean, that's sort of a byproduct of being really honest, but that's what it is. It's the combination of inviting people into curiosity and telling stories that move people. I mean, that's what gets people to open up and really have insight.
Yeah. I want to ask you one question about your experience as a woman in the workplace. And just, you've experienced some challenges. You've gone into a bunch of different cultures, as a consultant or, facilitator in a lot of ways. How do you see that? Do you see it differently for a man trying to, make a name for himself and put himself out there? Do you see that differently for a woman? Are there some commonalities between the two?
It's interesting, because that question I mentioned at the beginning of when I ask people ways they're silencing themselves back or holding themselves back at work.
Yeah.
I've never seen a comment where somebody says, gosh, that my female boss was like really keeping me down and holding me back, or made me feel like what I had to say didn't matter. Like never once. Maybe it might happen, but I've heard women say that about other women. But I've never heard a man say that about a woman, which does not mean it doesn't happen, because I'm sure that it does. People get on power trips. Power trips are not necessarily gender specific. Insecurity and ego are not gender specific. But I do find that part of it is the way I think women are brought up in society, right? Again, to like, what do you hear? Be a good little girl, right? But just the perception, these is very broad generalizations, but the perception is like, oh, little boys are just kind of rough and tumble and, the duke it out or whatever. But like be a good little girl. No one says like, be a wild and free little girl. Like no one says that.
Right.
And so I feel like a lot of women, and also just the weight and the burden that is disproportionately placed on women to manage everything, not just their job, but manage their house. And again, like there are statistics around, I don't have them offhand, but that women contribute disproportionate amount of their time and energy toward managing their house and dealing with things with kids and having to manage their job and do doctor's appointments and all of that. And so, and they feel like, I think a lot of women feel like, well, this is just what it is to be a woman. And you just need to suck it up and you just need to figure it out. And don't complain about it because this is what everybody has to deal with. But that's a lot. That is not how it's always been. And that's a lot emotionally. I mean, I was listening to a podcast the other day, I forget what it was, but just like the number of women, Gabor Mate, whose work I love, he wrote a book called The Myth of Normal. He's written, and When the Body Says No. And it was like the number of women that are disproportionately diagnosed with anxiety and depression relative to men is like exponentially higher. The amount of women that are diagnosed with autoimmune conditions is, I believe he said, don't quote me on this, but almost double that of what men are diagnosed with. Autoimmune conditions, your body attacking itself because you're asking too much of it, you know?
Yeah.
And so, and this is coming from somebody who burned out and got mono, Epstein-Barr virus in 2017 when I was the director of well-being for my company. And with a master's degree in health science, with a bachelor's degree in psychology, as a health coach, as a food blogger. I mean, like, my goodness, like if I couldn't figure this out with all that training and background and credentials and knowledge, it's no wonder it's so hard for people to prioritize themselves and to believe they're worthy of being seen in the way they want to be seen. So I think anyone can struggle with a lack of self-worth. Anyone can struggle with confidence. Anyone can struggle with speaking up and speaking out at work. But I think given that most organizations, most C-suites are run by men, right, it can be harder for women to feel like they have a voice and to really be heard.
No, that's great. And as a male leader myself, I'm always curious to hear that stuff, and just so I'm aware of how I can continue to give people permission, right, and continue to lead teams of mixed genders and make everyone feel equal, that their voice is heard, is valued. So that's great to hear.
I'll give you a quick example of something that was actually helpful in my corporate career that my boss did. So my boss, Richard, who I worked for in some capacity for 17 years, I interned there for 4 years. He could have said no when I said, I want to be a wellness coordinator and I want to do fitness challenges here. And I want to go to, Ann Arbor, Michigan to go to this workplace wellness conference at 24, 25 years old. And he could have said no to all of that. He could have said, this isn't a job that exists. You need to be an account coordinator. This isn't really even a thing. But he really vouched for me.
Yeah.
And he supported my desire when I said, I want to get trained in this thing around thriving workplace culture coaching. And here's what it costs. And here's how it's going to benefit the company. Again, I was very strategic in how I positioned everything. And I was very honest. And when I saw the benefits, but to his credit, he supported me and he rooted for me. And he would always say things like, oh, were your ears burning? I was talking about you at this one meeting. And, that really made me feel special. And as a young woman trying to make her way, to have somebody who, it wasn't always like roses and sunshine all the time, but to have someone who generally, like I even joked, a year before I left, I was talking at our holiday party and he was there. And I said, yeah, Richard gave me a really long leash. And he laughed without hesitation. He goes, leash? He was like, you just do what you want. You don't have a leash. And I was like, I mean, kind of. So I'm a little bullish. So, but that really made such a difference, is to have someone, he's an entrepreneur himself. He's an innovator. Yeah. He's a creative, he's a visionary. And so he saw that in me.
Yeah.
And he allowed that to show up, and I fought for it, but to his credit, he also made space for it.
Right. Absolutely. I think obviously whether you're male or female, everyone needs a sponsor in life. Everyone needs help. No one can do it alone.
No.
And I guess that's a piece of advice I would give listeners or, young professionals out there trying to, start their journey, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
right? Is sometimes we get too enamored with the job itself or the company itself, but we maybe discount the people we get to work with, and
Mhm.
surrounding yourself with people that could potentially become a sponsor or supportive on your journey
Mhm.
is equally, if not more important, because you'll find success no matter where you are if you're dedicated to it, right? So it's about finding that environment that'll allow that to thrive.
Yeah.
So I guess a final couple questions for you here, Rachel. Maybe it's kind of a two-parter. So if you had to give one piece of advice, you mentioned earlier about this process of unmuting yourself as a journey.
Mhm.
So for those folks out there, whether you are maybe a young professional trying to chart your path, or you are a leader understanding that you need to make a change, what is the one piece of advice how they can get started on that journey?
Mm. So, in light of thinking about the conversation today, there was something that we did that was a really helpful practice at my old job where we tracked what are called energy vampires, which was not made, I forget who made it up. It was a term that came out in the 70s or 80s, I think. And what they called highest payoff activities. I've heard another colleague Rex of mine that calls them gains and drains. So
Mhm.
when you think about what you're doing, to start to have some clarity around, all right, what are the things that when you are doing them at work, you feel lit up? You really enjoy yourself. Time maybe passes by more quickly. You notice that you have an inherent curiosity in that area of what you're doing. That might be your, highest payoff activity, or something that when you're doing it, it has a really significant noticeable impact to the organization. And if you can, ideally, if it has an impact and you enjoy it, that's like the optimal place. But then also to make a list for yourself of your energy vampires. What are the things that you're doing that just suck the life out of you? And that was common vocabulary, common vernacular at our organization. And so it was conversations we could have. So starting in probably 2015, I'd go to my boss, who was the CFO, and I'd say, hey, here's based on what I'm seeing, the impact I'm having. These are my highest payoff activities. When I'm doing these things, I have the greatest impact on the organization and on our clients, on our reputation, on our brand, on our ability to market ourselves as different. And these are the things that are just really taking energy away from me doing these other things. Could we explore how some of these things I might just stop doing them, or maybe find a way to delegate them to somebody else? Which again it takes courage to have that conversation, but to start to have an awareness for yourself. What do you do that lights you up, and what do you do that sucks you dry?
Mhm.
And to take an inventory of that, and to see, even just pick one of those things. How could I communicate one of these things to my boss, and explore some creative ways that we might approach, how to minimize it or maximize it? So, and then as a boss, right, as a leader, to have a conversation like that with your people. What are the things that you're doing that you enjoy, even somewhat? And what are the things that when you're doing them, like, the weekend cannot come soon enough? What is one thing in each of those buckets? That's not an easy conversation to have, because some of the stuff you do for work is going to be stuff you don't enjoy. I didn't love everything I did. And when I almost lost my job, I found, because there wasn't enough wellness work for me to do, I found other ways to add value that had nothing to do with wellness.
Yeah.
I edited RFPs. I taught Excel and PowerPoint training classes to people. I found other ways to bring value to the company that had nothing to do with what I actually wanted to do, but that still leveraged skill sets that I had. So I think that's another thing, is to think about, what is a skill set that you have that is not being utilized by your company, whether it's connected to something you're passionate about or not. Is there a way that you can add value and contribute? And to have leaders ask, is there a skill or an ability or a talent that you have that we're not using that you think we could use? So those are a couple of questions I think could be asked on either side.
That's great. That's absolutely great. Rachel, you're definitely someone that life doesn't happen to. You've definitely taken life into your own hands, which is inspiring. So I thank you so much for coming on the show. One final question, and I think this came out of your TED Talk recently, so any listeners out there, certainly go check it out. But who gets the best and who gets the rest?
Of me.
Of you.
I feel like I'm getting better at really, it's still a struggle for me, I'll be honest with you. When I first wrestled with that question, everyone that I loved and cared about got the rest of me when I burned out. And that was a really hard realization, including my husband and including me. I was not getting the best of myself. I was giving myself whatever was left over. I was running on fumes. I was exhausted, resentful, burned out. I was not okay. And now, I go to therapy every Saturday. My husband and I have gone to multiple couples retreats to learn how to connect and communicate more effectively. Each weekend, if we're in town, make a point to hang out with a girlfriend, or to invest in doing the thing I love as my side project, which is music, so I feel like I really prioritize my rest. Like it's much more of a non-negotiable than it was 6 years ago. So I feel like there's not a clear set answer to that question for me, but I feel like I'm learning. I'm in a process because of doing a lot of work, psychological, emotional, it's hard stuff. I'm in a better place of giving more of the best of myself to my husband, to myself, to my closest friends. But I'm a work in progress like everybody else. And I have ways that I want to be better as an aunt, that I want to be better as a sister, that I want to be better even still as a wife, and I think if most of us are honest with ourselves, most people will probably say similar things.
Absolutely. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I hope our listeners learned as much as I did in this. If people want to stay in touch with what you're doing, how can they find and keep up with your work?
So LinkedIn would be that's the main place I hang out. LinkedIn. You can go to my website, which is unmutedlife.com, and then my Instagram at unmutedlife. And you can also find my music on Spotify or wherever you stream music. Search my name and my songs will come up. I've got another one coming out before the end of the year, and then on YouTube as well. So those are the main places that I hang out. But LinkedIn's my jam. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And until we get to talk again.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening to the Innovation Economy podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes at www.innovationeconomy.show or on your podcast platform of choice. The Innovation Economy podcast was created by the Agile Brand. Be sure to check out the Agile Brand Guide series of books, the Agile Brand podcast, and other resources for marketing, CX, and other enterprise leaders to manage change and transformation in their organizations. The Innovation Economy is proudly produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, let's keep innovating.